Please tell our audience about yourself.
I've been a CIO for about 30 years. I started in government, and my first role was to be an engineer for New York City Transit Authority, an electrical engineer. I think I was the first woman engineer and probably the first electrical engineer in the Department of Buses. So that was a fascinating role at a college. I'm originally from Iran. I was born in Tehran, and I came here when I was 14, 15 years old, and I studied engineering. So I've gone through different roles in my career. From an engineer, I went to the unit chief engineer in charge of testing and inspection and design for the MetroCard program. And that was in 1986, a long time ago. And that's when we were just beginning to pilot the product, and we're doing a lot of design around the appliances in the subway stations, the MetroCard itself, the systems around the MetroCard, basically moving New Yorkers from a token to digital cash. And moving the organization, which spent a lot of time on counting token, counting the cash, collecting it, returning it back, and selling the tokens. I mean, this is an extensive amount of work and resources. From there, I went to manufacturing. I was the vice president of a manufacturing firm in a Navy Yard. We started to do manufacturing and actually renovate and rebuild trains and buses in New York, which was the first time. I went back to transit around 91, 92, and ended up being the CIO and the head of the MetroCard program. And towards the end, when I was leaving, it was a much more expanded role, not only technology for the New York City Transit, which was a 45,000 organization, employees within the organization, but more diverse oversight over the card itself, the sponsorship, the marketing, and other aspects of it. From there, I went to Ogilvy as their global CIO for about 9.5 years. And that was it was a pretty big change, going from government to the private sector, which was fascinating for me. And it involved deploying technology across 400 offices in 100 countries, and understanding the different markets, Europe, Latin America, Eastern Europe, the BRIC markets, Brazil, Russia, India, China. And around that time is when technology was exploding, and marketing companies were looking at building in their interactive arm and building their digital arm, and the amortization of technology, where consumers were digesting information and media and information, a lot differently than they were prior to that. And then after that, I went to start a non-for-profit called CIOs Without Borders, and that's where the one thing I saw during my travels globally was the impact of e-waste. It's something that us as CIOs contribute to that. And if you look at electronics, there's a tremendous amount of mercury and lead, poison, in these equipments. And there is a lack of focus and lack of responsibility on the behalf of our sector, both in terms of manufacturing, where we put these chemicals in this, and the manufacturers put them in this equipment, and on the behalf of the practitioners like us, where we turn away from the impact. And we are not responsible about making sure we have proper e-waste. So this equipment that we ship from the West to China, India, is basically polluting the environment. Mercury and lead are things that, if you go to China, you see little kids playing with wires and dismantling these boards, things that you and I would never let our children close unless they have hazmat equipment and clothes on them. So I wanted to focus on e-waste and raise awareness and persuade our sector to begin lobbying against these chemicals in electronics. And secondly, I am a big believer that technology has a tremendous impact. It can truly improve human life. If you look at the impact of technology in healthcare and education, if you look at the digital divide and the lack of having technology. So we did some work around the Agent Orange. We built them a website as CIOs Without Borders because we wanted to make sure we raised awareness around the impact of this on not second but third generation in Vietnam. And there was another project in Rwanda that we co-sponsored with the Stevens Institute, because if you look at Rwanda has 10 million people and only 400 doctors, and lots of people die from just basic disease that you and I can easily go get antibiotics or just prevention of the disease. There was this great person named Abraham George who had done some work in India, and he had developed an expert system that would diagnose most diseases and you'd be able to give medication. And we wanted to bring that to Rwanda because you can't get doctors, you can't get nurses, but guess what? You can get a technician with a piece of software and a $2,000 lab. And through the expert system, you could diagnose 70 to 80% of illnesses and treat. So it's fascinating.
You are an electrical engineer. You became the chief information officer for different companies. And in order to do that, you need to have a strong leadership skills, management skills. How did you develop those skills?
Let me answer that with a story. I was the CIO of New York City Housing Authority 3.5 years ago. I got that job. And within 6 months or so, a general manager left who heads NYCHA. NYCHA is a $3 billion firm. And the board came to me and said, can you become the general manager? And I was the CIO. And I think there was a shockwave sent across the public housing because New York City has the largest public housing in North America. That the CIO was appointed to run the agency. What does she know about construction? What does she know about public housing? What does she know about plumbing, electrical, all of those? So I think that a lot of time when engineers, IT people, they live in their left brain, and the rest of the body is there to hang out with the left brain. I do think to be a good executive, you do need to live in both the right brain and the left brain, which means the rational and irrational thinking, and welcome and embrace it. And we learn as physicists and engineers that shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line. But in reality, it isn't. In reality, you know, if you work in an organization that's political, the straight line is probably the worst route to take. And I think that a combination of understanding rational thinking and understanding the politics in the organization, living in your left brain, living in the right brain, understanding that with innovation comes responsibility, and that at the end it's all about people, right? It's the paradox we have. We do in the technology space. We all think we are here to deploy tools and hardware and software. Every IT conference you go to and you look at what people talk about, they're talking about things. And I think IT has moved on. IT has moved on to knowledge and to points. It's about information, it's about learning, it's about innovation. It's about how we react to those tools. It's about experience. And I think when you live in that space, you become a better manager than just living in the kind of tools, hardware, software, and the technical aspects of our field.
If you want to make a company successful, you want to have right people. You want to have right leaders. So what qualities are you looking for when you're looking to hire the right leader?
To me, the first quality is passion. Passion and compassion. Because without it, we're all lost. And if you have that, and you have a sense of what you're doing, you know, people always, when you ask them what you do and tell me about your environment, they actually do tell you what they do and how they do it. So at a technical level, we're pretty good at what we do and how we do it. But we rarely know why. And the good person, when you're trying to get a right person, there is a person that will rise beyond the what and how to why, and they would question things, and they would not be afraid to change it. And that type of mindset is kind of living in a different part of your brain. It's maybe you live in your heart, but if you continue to ask the question of why, you will get to what and how. And a lot of people do not transform the operation. It doesn't matter if you're in IT or in finance or in operation, it doesn't matter. Your job is to continuous transformation and continuous change. Either through the use of technology, either through the use of clear-headed management, it doesn't really matter. I think instinct and intellect is something that I also love to see. I love to hire someone that reads philosophy, that understands literature, that understands history, because if you don't understand those things, then you can't really transform anything, because you don't understand the implications of it, and you don't understand the environment of transformation. And that's what we do. We transform societies, economy, we transform different sectors through the use of technology. So those are some of the things I like to see in a person. I think a good leader is someone that you want to follow, someone that influences, someone that you don't even see when there is success, right? You can build a team instead of divide a team. So there's so many attributes of a good leader, but I think it just starts with that passion, someone that can make you fall in love and follow the person off the cliff. And that's rare.
When you lead an organization, when you're in crisis, does your leadership style change, and if so, how?
I think it's probably more intense, right? We are in the midst of crisis. If you look at to my earlier point about environmental crisis, you have economic crisis. So you have constant crisis that we have to lead through. Organizations, private sector, you see, they're in the midst of crisis in terms of competition constantly. Public sector in a crisis in terms of the financial pressures that's on them. But your style does change, because in times of crisis, people become scared. And people move under two conditions, hope and fear. And the ability to rise above it and bring hope and order to chaos is something that you need at a time of crisis. And you could be yourself scared shitless. But the good leader can camouflage it and be able to lead the organization through. So I can tell you with my experience around Hurricane Andrew, I was the general manager of NYCHA. My first day I had the earthquake. And here you have about 800,000 customers. Did any of them get hurt? Within a couple of weeks we had Hurricane Andrew. You have to evacuate 45,000 people from Rockaways and Coney Island within 24 hours, and they're scared. And how do you bring order? How do you mobilize people? How do you get them interested, excited? How do you get them to commit? So I think that a good leader generally can just fall into that place and go on high alert and mobilize. And another part of it is, when there's chaos, it's hard to see what's the first thing to do. How do you make sense of it? How do you say, these are the 3 things I need to do? And if I do those 3 things, we will be successful and we'll get it done. And a good leader can do that, can look at chaos and find those 3 things and pinpoint it, and then drive the team to deliver, because he or she is just an orchestrator. It's the team that delivers. And it's about getting your team to deliver at its optimum capability to be effective and to be successful.
How do you define innovation?
You know, I look at the yellow stick-ons. I love my yellow stick-ons, and my kids love the yellow stick-ons. But then came up the pink stick-ons, and the orange ones, and the small ones, and the big ones. That's innovation, right? We think as technologists that you have to have huge investments of technology to bring about innovation. And what we at times could bring is computerization, not innovation. Because innovation is really through business process transformation or product transformation. It's very simple. It's not that complex. So, but innovative people are strange. They kind of come up with these harebrained ideas. Nobody likes innovative people. They bring chaos to the organization. They bring chaos wherever they are. The whole beginning phase of innovation is, I call, the phase of great excitement. But shortly after is the phase of great despair, because it brings with it change. So you can't innovate without understanding the implication of change. And you cannot innovate without understanding of the implication of innovation. So if you look at the single combustion engine, amazing innovation, right? Where would we be? Where would suburbia be without the car? But the person who innovated the single combustion engine never thought about the impact on the environment, the global warming, from one simple innovation. So we have great sophistication as technologists to innovate. I think we have lesser sophistication to understand the huge impact of innovation on our society, on the environment, on the economy. Some is positive, but some of it takes long. It's not like the hiss of Titanic, right? The innovation impact would take years, take 30, 40, 50 years. So I'm a big believer in innovation, but I do think you have to have responsible innovation. And as technologists, we are responsible, we are accountable to make sure that, thou shalt do no harm, that we understand the risk, and we understand that when we create something, if you look at the cell phones, the person who innovated the cell phone never thought about the Madrid bombing. They never thought about 90% of accidents in cars happen because people are on cell phone. These are the implications of our innovations. At the same time, when you look at mobile phones and mobile devices, huge enabler for uprising in Far East, Middle East, Africa, because of openness of communication. So what's interesting is a byproduct. We design something for one purpose, and then human-machine come into play. And when human-machine come to play, the byproduct is a lot more interesting than the original purpose, and some is a lot more frightening.
How do you build a culture of change within an organization?
Yeah, I think change is the number one problem most organizations have. Most organizations don't like change. They are risk-averse, and what I call success is a curse for organizations. When things work, that's when the organization is cursed, because it becomes lazy. So if you look at the circle of success, it starts with creativity and innovation. It goes into success, and then things stop. And then it's disaster, because the innovation, if you look at companies that are going under or have gone under, those are the companies that have not embraced the change. So I have a three-pronged approach, I call it. I have a military approach, a political approach, and a marketing approach. The military approach is what I mentioned earlier, is people move when they're afraid. We, as optimists, as IT people, usually use hope to get people moved, but we have to use fear, because the fact is, if the company does not innovate, doesn't change, it's going to go under. If you look at what has happened in the retail industry, travel industry, if you look at even Kodak, these are great companies that are just going under, because the CIO never stood up and said, look guys, either you move or you are going to die. So we have to take very strong positions, because we understand, and I think we got to have our finger on the pulse of how is our product changing, how is the competition changing, how is the consumer changing. Our consumer is changing every few years. This is incredible, the amount of change. But the second one is political campaign. We as technologists play the monopoly on the board. The game is played off the board when you negotiate, I give my utility, I sell my utility to you, you sell me your hotel. That's off the board. We play on the board, and that's our problem. So if you want the organization to change, you have to play off the board. You have to understand who are your influencers. You have to get them on, and you have to get them to be supportive. You also have to understand power and politics. Most of us think power is bad. The fact is, if you're a CIO, somebody gave you the power to do your job. And if you don't use it, then you're not doing your job. We think politics are consistent across organization. Goals are consistent, so vision is centralized. And are false. And when it comes to power, we play only in expert power. So if you're in a meeting, most of the IT guys, CIOs, will only respond to a technical question. And you never hear them talk about the financials, talk about marketing strategy, talk about operations strategy, manufacturing strategy. They want to live in the expert quadrant. And if you wanted to enable a change, you have to live in all the quadrants, because you need your power, you need to understand the politics to be able to transform the operation. And finally, if you look at movement of organization, 30% always will support you, 50% sit on the sideline, and 20% will be the naysayers. And we focus on the squeaky wheel. And my point is, look, ignore the squeaky wheel. Focus on the 50% that are sitting on the sideline. Those are the ones you want to bring, and you can never bring everybody with you. And transform the operation, understanding that at the end of it, you lose your job. That's the goal. Because if you haven't lost your job at the end of it, you haven't done your job.
Which technologies are high in demand right now? Are you seeing any changes in the marketplace?
I think we have moved from a lot of the equipment, tools, software become utility. Where we are moving is into analytics to a great degree. So the technologies that provide the information and knowledge is, to me, what's high in demand. I'll give you some examples. I know we were looking at and making some investments in security cameras. And we looked at analytics 10 years prior to installing cameras and 10 years after to see whether there was any reduction in crime, because the hearsay and the street legend is that cameras reduce crime. It was only through the analytics that we realized that cameras do not reduce crime. They reduce car theft, but they do not reduce crime. So the important point here is that when we, as both public-private sector, continue to invest on the wrong things because we just don't know, we have a gut feel, maybe it works, maybe it doesn't, it is through analytics that for the first time we're going to realize that a lot of what we believe is incorrect. And that's where we're making huge investments. So I think that's incredibly important, and that's an area, if I were to invest, that's what I would invest, because most corporations have invested in streamlining internal processes. They're beginning to streamline the relationship with the consumer. Many haven't, many are still behind, but they are. Other areas I think are nanotech, alternate fuels, organic semiconductors, artificial intelligence. I mean, these are, even if you look at digital cash, and then you mentioned education. School is the last physical space with a pen and a pencil that we have, and it needs huge transformation. Healthcare is transforming itself, but at what point, when I go back to the Rwanda example, at what point will technology replace man? Where is necessary, right? I mean, if you can't get enough doctors, can you get something else? I mean, we need to at some point stop and really look at the serious issues around us of hunger, poverty, disease. 18,000 children die every day from hunger. And we think, okay, where can technology help? That's our tool, that's what we got. Disease, where can technology help? So I think there is, it goes back to this tremendous power that it has to impact lives positively, and that's what we have to think about.
Why do you think employers and CIOs are having problem finding qualified people?
Part of it is our immigration policy. I think if Einstein walked through our immigration doors, we'd probably turn him away. So our immigration policy has become very strict, and as a result, we cannot recruit right people in. So that's one. Second, I think our education has failed us on many levels. If you look at the IT sector, we teach our kids to be consumers of technology, not contributors. And unless you're a contributor, you cannot be a good technologist. I mean, so that has to change. If you look at education, and I'll give you an example of my children's school closed about a year ago. And I decided that we're going to open up a school. And we're going to teach the kids in a way they're supposed to learn, not the way that the education system says they have to learn. So we're opening up a school with a new way of teaching, which is not through extensive homework, which is not through kind of narrow focus on test, because we teach so people can pass tests. We don't teach to create intellectual citizens that are global and can think and can learn continuously, to your point. We teach them to pass a test. We've forgotten about learning. And those are the kids that we interview for jobs. And that's not acceptable, because this is not, the technology changes every 3 years. And you're right, there are 3 million jobs, but there are lots of IT people who, because they don't invest in themselves, they don't know how to learn, they have become obsolete. So they can't get a job because the technology they learned 3 years ago is no longer in use. And we also learn not through direct teaching, but we learn through experimentation. David Hume said we learn through cause and effect, right? Children learn, you see a ball, hits another ball, that moves. You're learning this whole theory of relativity through the observation and through play. So the style of teaching, the focus of teaching, what is important in teaching, the fact that we do not really bring in other disciplines to our education, so our graduates could be holistic people who care about the world, who care about philosophy, who care about science, who understand implications. Those skills are missing, and if you're missing those huge skills and all you can do come code and not so well, then you can't compete.
Why do you think it's important to build a learning organization?
So before you even build a learning organization, you have to build an organization that believes in transformation. We have organizations today and that are have fundamental issues, structural issues, and people issues, and turf issues. So I think you got to do a lot to reach a point where now you want to move them to the next phase of learning. If you do not have a team, and if the organization is not sold on the vision and the mission and excited and energized, you could teach them for a long time. Doesn't mean they're going to become effective teams. So, with Jack Welch, he had done all the other fundamental basics to get the organization to the point that now we're going to learn from our mistakes. And mistakes are okay. The organization has to have the culture to accept failure and to accept risk. And it takes time. The cultural evolution of an organization takes time. There's an Asian saying that, something that's broken is a lot more precious. Because in Asia, when something breaks, they fix it with gold. So now you have a teapot that has lots of gold in it, and it's therefore a lot more precious because it's been broken. And you have to kind of break the organization to bring it back up to what it should be, which means we need to fail, we need to take a risk, we need to learn from it. So I'll go back to the first question about learning. If you are open to let the organization innovate, take a risk, fail, and accept the failure, then you will start to build the foundation of a learning organization. And then you can start to bring techniques in. But unless you do the fundamentals, the organization would be too scared to do it.
What do you think is the most effective learning method? Is it a classroom training? Is it an online training? Is it a learning by asking questions, learning by doing, learning by reading? What is your assessment?
It depends on the personality, it depends on the character of the person. I'm a fixer. So I get something, I don't even look at the manual. I'm just going in there to fix it. I need my hands and I need my eyes, and I learn through that. So I think it depends, and you have to understand that it's not a cookie cutter. For the organization, there are different people, and you need different people in your organization. That's success. Different people bring different skill set and strengths to the organization. So I can't kind of put my finger on one is the right method for learning, and there is a space. Right now, we tell people that you can only learn in a classroom, and you only need a book, and you need a pencil, and that is where we're moving away from, right? That you could learn in any environment, in any setting, using any medium. Children learn through games. Children learn through play. So I don't really have an answer for you. I think that as a manager, you have to understand your team and you have to provide the environment for them to learn the best way.
Why it is important for leaders within the organization to invest on employee development and employee learning?
So I've been to many organizations. Some have invested extensively on employee development. Some have invested very little. And I can tell you that some of them that invested extensively in employee development and forgot to care about the employees, the investment didn't yield much. Because investment alone in training without doing everything else it's just like if you go to get a Superman outfit for Halloween, in the back of the outfit it would always say it doesn't enable you to fly. And that's important. So organizations who would think just because I'm offering you training, now you got to be good, don't really get the results they need to get. It doesn't make them fly. But if you got everything else working, then that is so critical that you have to do. Also, the learning is everybody's responsibility. I've had people come to me and say, you're not training me in my new skills. And I would say, well, half of it is your job. Have you enrolled in a class yourself? And there is this blank stare sometimes. So it is not the organization's responsibility to develop the employees. It is the employees' responsibility to develop themselves. And it is the organization's responsibility to support that development. And I think that neither one can shrug from the responsibility. And then you have to measure the effectiveness of that learning, in whatever it is, organization effectiveness, efficiency, productivity, improve customer service. So do we measure, and how do we measure the effectiveness of the training? Sometimes gets lost.
What made you successful?
I think my failures. So that's one. The second one is the price for my success was paid dearly by my parents. I left Iran when I was 16. The revolution happened, and I remember my parents selling everything they had for my college tuition. When I went back, years after, there was no rug in the house, there was no furniture, there was nothing, there was no gold. So, as an immigrant, when you look at the amount of effort that your family or others spend on your success, there is no room for failure. And there are many times when in your career you say, I can't do this, it's just too hard. There's got to be a better way. And then you think that option is off the table. The second part of it is, I'm a woman. My grandmother was married at 9. And my mother wasn't allowed to go to school after the 3rd grade, while her brothers went to school. And they all became professors and doctors. And she had to put herself through school later on, and she's now a novelist. But the struggle that women have had to have and to show that they could learn, that they could go to school, that they could be successful in the roles that men have traditionally had in an engineering role. So it is the effort, and it's the drive, and it's the commitment, and it's the option of quitting is not an option. That is not an option. You continue, and it is doing what you love. I love what I do. I love technology, and I believe that technology can improve human life. And what other job would one want to be?
What advice do you have for young people who want to rise to the top?
I think instead of wanting to rise to the top, they should strive to be a full human being. They should, I think, sense the power of self, of who they are. They should have self-confidence, and they should have power for those things in life that don't have any value, like the environment. It's not a commodity. It doesn't give you anything to have the power to care for it. It's the people around the world. It's serious issues that we confront. To be in Dharma, you have to do what you love. You may get to the top, you may not. But at the end, when you look back, you have fulfilled your mission. So I think that's more important, because when you do what you love, automatically you get to the top. If you do what you hate, then you will have a miserable life. And you could have success the way we in the West define success: power, money, boat, couple of homes. But that's not what life is about. Life is a lot more than that. Life is about fulfilling your goal, your mission, and it's about giving back to your society, giving back to your community, giving back to the rest of the world.
Do you have mentors, and did they help you to shape your life?
I've had a couple of good bosses and friends and colleagues, and I remember one of them once told me that early in my career, and he said, look, in a meeting, within the first 2 minutes of the meeting, you need to raise your hand and say something, even if that means, excuse me, I gotta go to the bathroom. That was a lot, meant a lot to me, because again, I go back to we play in our expert quadrant. And if you're in a meeting, you're in a discussion, you're in a conversation, and you decide to exclude yourself from that conversation, that's your decision. And you don't play the game. You're not playing the game. The second thing that I remember is, again, somebody I dearly love that I worked for. And I was maybe 20 writing my first engineering letter, and I said, I feel that's the right approach. And he said to me, no, you don't feel. You're an engineer. You believe that's the right approach. At that moment, I realized how the society looks at women and men. Because women feel, and feeling is bad. Thinking is right. It took me this long to get to this point of my career, 30 years, to realize that if you don't feel, you're not a good leader.
What is your biggest accomplishment?
Well, other than my 2 children, which is just wonderful prize of my life, the MetroCard project, if you think professionally, was a big part of my life. I spent 16 years there. Transformation of the city towards digital cash. I think the formation of CIOs Without Borders is a big part of my life. I think being appointed by the Secretary General to the seat of the UN, where I can actually be allowed to contribute using technology in this amazing organization is just humbling.
Well, what type of book do you like to read? And are you reading something?
I read everything. I am reading The Way of Kata right now. And I'm not a martial arts person, but it is about martial arts. And it's an amazing book about, if you look at human body and the strength points and the weak points, it's like an organization. An organization, your team, has strengths and weaknesses at different points. And how do you apply pressure to each point? So from an organizational perspective, it's a great book. I just finished reading Huck Finn. So I finished reading The Theory of Relativity by Einstein. Lectures of physics from Feynman. So I have a very diverse perspective on books. When I was a kid, I used to read 10 books a day. And I would hide it under my textbooks. So whenever my mom and dad came in, they'll see the textbook. So I used to argue about Kafka and Camus and Sartre, because my dad is a philosopher, with him when I was 8 or 9. And he used to be extremely open to my really weird and completely uncooked perspectives. And the one thing he taught me is learning. Because he would sit back and say, you know something, I think you're right on that. And I would sit back and I say, how could he say that? And he was teaching philosophy in the university, and he told me I was right. The fact is that he's able to change his mind at this age. And if you can change your mind, it means you have the ability to learn and to listen. So very rewarding, and something that I always try to remember, that you could be wrong, and it's good to listen, and it's good to learn, it's good to change. So I love reading, and I read everything I can get my hands on if I have the time.